So welcome everyone to our, well, Happy New Year, first of all. Welcome to 2021. And this is the Buildings and Energy Technical Working Group for RVAgreen 2050. We'll just quickly go through the survey follow-up to make sure we are keeping everyone filled in on where we are in the process and how we can improve our process, and then the agenda and cover today's objectives. So first of all, from the survey, at the end of each meeting, we've been doing these survey follow-ups, and some of the feedback we got were questions like, what specific work will the work group be responsible for completing over the coming months? And hopefully we're answering that question as we go, but I certainly want everyone to fully understand what this is all about, what your role is, and where we are in the process. So please speak up. Feel free to ask questions at any time. We're going to be talking about some other options for engagement to answer those kinds of questions, but certainly feel free to use the chat on this presentation or email us at any time, call us, things like that. So we'll be going over the upcoming meetings so you can get a sense of what's to come. We also got the feedback that you really like the breakouts and longer breakouts so you can have more productive discussions in smaller groups. So we're going to be doing a few of those today. And let's see, discuss what would be needed to get Richmond to become a welcoming location for current residents and new potential residents. So I certainly don't have the answer to that, but I think collectively we can work towards that end. So just keep in mind that that's what some of your colleagues are bringing up as important considerations in this process. So in terms of the agenda today, we'll settle in, go over some ground rules, a recap on the previous meeting, and an opportunity for some Q&A. And then we'll go over today's topic, which is the equity screening tool, what that's all about, the draft screening tool that has been produced by the roundtable, and we'll have lots of opportunity for your feedback on that. And then we'll go through wrap up and next steps. So in terms of today's objectives specifically, we want to really further understand how equity, and particularly racial equity, is central to this process, and then provide input on the equity screening tool as one of the mechanisms we will use to center equity in our work. And I know we keep saying this over and over, but it's just so important to centralize this topic in what we're doing and to understand what that means to our participation in this process. But first, I want to go over some ground rules and group expectations. We don't need to read these again, but I wanted to introduce Irina Kalos, if she's on the call, to highlight anything in particular on this list that she would like to speak to. She's one of our co-chairs.
Hi, everyone. So I run a lot of meetings for my day job, and these are all pretty standard ground rules and expectations. The biggie is just be kind. Thankfully, everybody here has done a very good job with that. I tend to talk too much, and one of the things that I've discovered as we've been doing these Zoom meetings is that the chat feature is very, very useful. You can ping people directly if you want to have a sidebar conversation. So don't forget about that. But I think we've all been doing a really good job here, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work with everybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. So with that, we are going to go into our first partner sharing session. You'll be split up into breakout rooms of 2 people in each room, and just want you to think a little bit out loud by reflecting on how equity has come up in your own work or in life, just to make this a little more practicable to you specifically and what you're bringing to the room. So Wendy's going to be sending you into those rooms. You'll have 4 minutes, and just respect each other's time and share, and we'll look forward to bringing you back when the 4 minutes is up. but bear with us because these breakout rooms can be tricky.
Okay. Hopefully that worked.
Okay. So it looks like, David, you might want to join Jonathan because he's by himself.
All right.
Do I need to do that?
And it looks,
I was just ignoring my invitation.
yeah, go ahead and go because he's by himself. And then Andrew has me and Alicia. So one of us should go talk to Andrew Grigsby.
Oh, okay. Do you want me to move? Do I need to move somebody?
I'm not doing the breakout, so.
Okay, I will go meet with him.
Okay.
So just pull us back when you're ready.
Thanks, Dawn.
Wendy, I was in a room by myself, so I'm not sure if someone else was
Okay.
by themselves as well in limbo, but
Sorry, I don't know why I did that because I put 2 to 3 per room. We have 23 people. Try and organize it better on the next one. Oh, okay. I didn't realize that when you hit close rooms, you still get 1 more minute. All right. So we're going to end up at 5 minutes instead of 4. Sorry.
Okay, are we all back?
got about 10 seconds left. Sorry.
Okay. And I'm not sure. I think you are still recording. Sometimes it's better to close the recording in breakouts.
Hey,
Okay, I think we're all back. So I just wanted to give the floor to anyone who had something to share on how equity has come up in your work or life, or something you'd like to bring up with the greater group.
well, the buildings group was not able to communicate. I could speak with Bob Stone, but not Josh. This is Ed Edmondson, sorry.
Huh. Interesting. As in they were on mute or what?
Josh and I were on video, but he couldn't hear me and I couldn't hear, well, he couldn't hear me, I couldn't hear him, and Bob Stone and I are on audio, and so we communicated by chat, but that's all we could do in the brief time we had.
Well, that's interesting. I haven't heard that scenario before. Does anyone have any ideas on how to fix that? Audio in breakout rooms?
Or did anybody else have that same problem, or is that an isolated thing?
I've had all kinds of issues with Zoom, and I hate being this person, but honestly, the thing that seems to fix it is if you restart your computer.
Shoot. Well, I'm sorry. This would be so much easier if we were all in person, and I would love the opportunity to get to know each of you better that way. But until we get there, we'll just keep plugging along and doing our best. And I think another option is to call in the invite. There's a phone number that you can call. Not that that's going to solve any problems, but it is another audio option. So sorry about that. Were there any specific points that folks brought up, did hear, and would like to share? Okay, well, please continue to think about that, and we'll have more opportunities to share in the following breakouts. So let's move on to recap the process. So when planning out future development and are assisting residents, we need to make sure that we're doing what we can to help them to be more resilient and not increase the carbon footprint of Richmond by preparing them and sharing access to these benefits. So centering equity is really important from the beginning of this climate action and resilience process. I think I've lost. There we go. I hope you can all hear me. So centering equity again is the priority of this planning process. That's why we keep bringing it up. And in terms of the timeline, we are moving into this orange stage.
Hey, Dawn, I just wanted to let you know you're not sharing your screen.
I'm not. Interesting. Thank you for letting me know. Yeah, all my controls just went away.
Let's see. Let me go back to you.
How's that?
You're good.
You got it.
All right. Well, thanks for bearing with us. Glitches are sometimes can't plan for these things, but so I was trying to make sure we all understood this integrated approach for RVAgreen 2050 and why centering equity is so important. And it's like I was saying, when planning out any of these future development projects that we'll be working on or assisting our residents by providing the benefits of preparing the community for climate change and the impacts of that. And we want to make sure that we're doing what we can to help them be more resilient and not actually increasing the carbon footprint at the same time. So this is all in preparation to do what we can to help our vulnerable communities. And in terms of where we are in this process, we're moving into the orange circles, which is the plan development phase. So that's very exciting. some of the changes we're making now that it's going to be a lot more interaction is making these meetings 2 hours. And to the next, we have another meeting in January, 2 in February, and 1 in March. So you should all have the invitations on your calendar for those. And we'll be going over the vulnerabilities and risk assessment at the next meeting, and then the following meetings will be drafting strategies. One of the ideas we had was to offer office hours. So I'm really curious to hear what you guys think of that in terms of, say we put out a Zoom link for open office hours on maybe Friday morning. So that from 9 to 10, you know that you can join this link if you have any questions or information you want to share, or you can request a one-on-one meeting. Another idea was to have optional meetings where those of you who have technical information to share could do brief presentations, very casual, 100% optional, but just a little more interaction between meetings to share information. So does anyone have any ideas or feedback on that or thoughts that you'd like to share?
I love the idea of sharing resources. I think probably lots of us have good stuff we do in our everyday work that we want to share with other people.
So as in doing a presentation?
That works.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to extend that invitation to each and every one of you. If you have something that you would like to give, I know in one of my other groups, I think in the waste group, our recycling CVWMA, Kim Hines, is going to give a presentation at some point on recycling. And that's just good information to everyone have because it does change, as you well know. And then an engineer is going to talk about waste management when, building new buildings, how you should consider it. So if you have some kind of area of expertise that you think would be good background to share with the group outside of these meetings, we would love to give you that stage. So just please contact me or Wendy and let us know, and we'll get that set up. Okay, so then with that,
Dawn, this
yes.
is Alicia. Just trying to check the chat. So Carrie asked about an interactive, a web-based forum for the group or somewhere that folks could perhaps share resources. Is that something that you may want to remind folks about the shared Google Drive? Or also, Irene is asking about like a Google group or a listserv. So those might be some other options for folks to share things.
Okay, thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, I apologize. With my screen, it looks different from what you all see, and the chat is not jumping out at me. So I would love for anyone to speak up at any time if you're noticing something that I'm not. So we have a Google Drive, and everyone's contact information is in there. You can create documents. You can create a Hangout and share resources. That's what the Waste Working Group has done. They have a Google Hangout where they can create sticky notes, add announcements about upcoming events. I think the electronics recycling might be this weekend, so they're sharing information like that. So definitely want to point that out. The link to that Google Drive is in the email, and Wendy may have put it in the chat. If not, we will make sure she's on mute. But
sorry, I'm signed in as me, so I need to go to my other one.
Okay, so yes, there is a Google Drive place for collaboration. We'll just continue to add resources. I know in the emails that we send, there's a lot of information, but please revisit those and you'll see the different links to the drives, links to the contact lists, where all this information is. I started to create a Google Doc this morning. I think it's called, meeting links or something. And it just is an easy place for us to put hyperlinks to web pages and documents that we discuss in these meetings. So that's another idea. Please feel free to add to that. Any other thoughts? Okay, well then moving on to the vision statement. We went over this last time. And we talked about the draft vision statement incorporated all of your feedback, the feedback from all of the other working groups. It is not finalized. The roundtable is still working on that, on finalizing it, but just to give you some of the feedback on the information that we gleaned from y'all. Simplify. It's lengthy. Some wanted us to define what net zero and carbon emissions, what does that mean? And then include other pollutants, define green infrastructure, include food justice was a comment that we got. And then some feel that it's overly focused on humans and doesn't necessarily include animals and ecosystems. And I was going to ask Brianne if you had any thoughts on how to answer that feedback, since you're on the line.
Hey, yeah, no, immediate thoughts. Like Dawn said, we're still working on incorporating all of the working groups' feedback. All 5 working groups have looked at this now. I think one, idea that we've discussed around simplification is making this much more sort of user friendly, so that anyone who reads it can see themselves in the vision for RVAgreen 2050, and then having some sort of supporting statements, or maybe a glossary or something like that, that would help to define any concepts that might be unknown to folks, or that people might not be familiar with. But we will be bringing this back to everybody in the next few weeks for the next version of what we come up with.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then I see.
Oh, sorry, there's one note in the chat from Ed asking, should our meetings be about sharing technical information to share or plugging that information into the Richmond community?
Both.
Okay. Yeah, I would say both, but I would love to hear what others think. I think between meetings, sharing technical information is great. And then for the purpose of these work groups, we definitely want to incorporate it into the planning process. Any other thoughts from others? It's a good question, though. It's an evolving process for sure. Okay, so we're going to move on into the equity tool. And this is, it's an opportunity for us to create something that will ensure that when we're making decisions related to policy or planning, programming, budgeting, that we are advancing racial equity and shared prosperity. Making sure that our work in the future is guided by the community priorities. And I heard someone say the other day that the nice thing about creating this tool and getting everyone to think this way is that it's taking the burden off of the few that are sometimes asked to represent a certain perspective. This kind of elevates it to everyone. Any thoughts? Was someone trying to speak up? Okay, so as we know, climate change affects some more than others. And the next 3 slides are just a reminder of why equity is so important and how it is being integrated into this work. We know that the sensitivity to climate change and the impacts affect some members of our community more than others due to a number of root causes and social factors that do increase sensitivity to things like extreme weather or heat waves. So this is just a list of some of those considerations that we do need to see. I think it helps to see it listed so that we, even if these don't affect each of us, there are a lot of members in our community where these are very important, and we want to make sure that it's considered in all of our work. So this is a map of Richmond, and it just makes it very clear that the Black and Brown communities are more vulnerable to climate change. So a lot of these maps about vulnerabilities look the same. And, Richmond's history, whether it's measured in centuries or decades or years or months or weeks or days, it's fraught with racism, unfortunately. And this has created a system or systems that serve our community in inequitable ways. from education and healthcare to government, natural resources. People of color and people who have lower incomes are more likely to live in areas with less green space, have higher rates of health conditions such as asthma, and live in housing without air conditioning. Our Black and Brown communities in particular face more harm due to crises such as climate change. We've seen it recently with COVID. And for those reasons, it is critical that our efforts to address climate change are carried out in a way that is inclusive of and protects our most vulnerable communities. So centering equity throughout the planning process and implementation of RVAgreen 2050, by centering equity, we can address those disproportionate impacts. And this slide helps us to kind of picture the different areas where we can center equity. So a framework to guide our process is thinking about these three components. So procedurally, we're doing that with this plan and creating the process and the process that we're going through to create the plan. That's procedural. Distributionally, are the strategies in this plan. And then structurally is the larger picture. Our hope is that this work will chip away at the systems and structures that exacerbate the inequalities that we see and inequities. So what is an equity tool? It's a product and a process. So the equity screening tool will be used to help us center equity in the actions and strategies that we draft together. It's a product in that it's a document or checklist, and it's a process as in it's a way to ingrain equity into our thought processes as we develop strategies. So that's why all of this work we're doing to think about how it relates to our work, to just take the time to watch the video. I hope you did see the video that we put in the email, the link, and I think Wendy has it in the chat as well. And that is just a really a great foundation. I've watched it like 3 times and there's still so much more to learn because it really explains the foundations of our country, how, the user group that it was founded for, and why these inequities are so prevalent today. So the equity screening tool will be used to help us center equity in the actions and strategies. And so we've looked at some examples from other cities. Cleveland has an example that has 5 main areas. And for each one of those, they had a series of questions for stakeholders to go through when developing the policies and strategies as outcomes of their climate action plan. And then San Antonio had they have a robust checklist system, and they have a citizen group who's responsible for overseeing their climate action plan. And then they go through each strategy using this checklist. Portland has a simpler list of 9 questions that the equity committee looks at when they're going through their climate action plan to make it more equitable. And this is an example of how Portland applied their equity tool to their existing climate action plan. They created new objectives when using the tool and added the specificity after to their strategies after it went through this tool. So those are just some examples of others. Ours, I think at the end of the day, it needs to be something that we feel is useful, obviously, and is easy to understand. You'll see that it's pretty big. And if you saw if you had opened up the attachment in the email yesterday, and I think we sent it last month as well, you'll see that there are a ton of questions. We're going to be working through that together. Lots of opportunities for your feedback, but I really want you to be considering how it's going to be useful. So for now, why don't we go back into breakout rooms and share your understanding of equity as it relates to climate and environment. And Wendy is going to send you back into those rooms.
Mhm.
Wendy, did you pause the? Okay, great. All right. So anyone have anything that you would like to share from your breakouts? Okay. Well,
I thought, I mean, not to put Michael on the spot, but at the intersection of health and climate and equity, I thought Michael's contributions around health impacts were very spot on.
awesome.
Thanks, Terry. So I just said that that the introduction covered a lot of this ground, but clearly climate damage affects some communities way more than others, especially those that have been traditionally subject to, you know, racial and other. Boy, I must have said it better last time, huh? You know, zip codes and communities that have been subject to tons of disparity, you know, historically. So the people who live there, you mentioned less air conditioning, there's also fewer trees. There's more higher prevalence of diseases that and treatments that put people at risk of heat-related illness. There's higher pollution levels, and et cetera, et cetera. And Carrie added that people may not want or be able to move from such areas.
Excellent points. Absolutely. Any other thoughts? I know that that each of you has really great information to share, and in listening in, sometimes I hear things in these small breakouts that don't necessarily get said in the bigger room. So certainly want to give you the opportunity to repeat some of those great points.
Rob and I were in a group, and he made a really interesting point about there appear to be some barriers out there to small solar projects within the community. He might be able to expand on that, because he apparently learned that recently, and that was news to me. I think that's a really important piece of information to have.
Yeah, so I work at the University of Richmond, and we just invested in a large solar array that's in Spotsylvania, and it's part of a really big system. And some of the pushback that we got internally from our folks that are interested in community solar and environmental justice was that there are limits to the amount of solar that can come online based on, you know, grid reliability, and so the community solar folks, which take longer to organize, are getting pushed out by some of the larger scale utility scale solar. And so it's not something I ever thought about when thinking about where we were going to invest, but the conversations came up about how big players that are often connected to multinational banks and other corporations push out the individuals, and especially those in lower income groups who need to band together. And I had no idea about the state's regulations when thinking about our own procurement. And so I think as we move forward, we need to understand the interconnectedness of our decisions to other people's access to similar decisions. So, you know, we need to think about how the big players in the city are going to make decisions and what we want them to do in terms of energy procurement. But when they do so, if we get Capital One or some other large group to make a huge commitment, we need to also think about how that affects the individual level.
Excellent. Any other thoughts?
I'll just respond quickly to that from a state solar perspective. I think that, you know, really speaks to the importance of the recent shared solar legislation and regulations that are coming out from the State Corporation Commission, and, you know, really proud to have worked on some of those, you know, submitting comments to the SCC around the importance of the 30% low to moderate income carve out in that shared solar program. So, but to your point, that the Spotsylvania County project is 500 megawatts in one fell swoop, and the entire shared solar program is, it'll start out at 150 megawatts. So it's just a fraction of the comparable. And you spoke to the challenges around interconnections and who can spend the resources to get in line for that. And I think it's really important to find systems of building community wealth, and that shared solar is one of those tools, and we need to be able to be creative in supporting that type of community wealth building through access to solar.
Thank you. And Michael also added a comment in the chat about we can't fight. We need both big and small efforts, but most of all, we need more.
Great. Well, thanks. I really appreciate the dialogue, the back and forth. Each of us bringing our own expertise and experience and sharing these thoughts and learning together. It's really what this process is about. So we are moving right along. The next portion of this meeting is going to be getting into the equity tool specifically. So I'm going to share my screen again and go back into understanding the community priorities. And let me make sure that I can see. Okay, so I believe that that you all have, you're familiar with these, you've seen this list. This came from some work that our office did over the summer in listening sessions with members from the folks who represent those frontline communities and the work that that goes on in there. So the Wendy, did you put in the chat the link?
Yes.
Okay,
to Google
great.
Slides, yes, to the tool.
Okay. All right. So before we get there, front and center, racial equity and environmental justice is a community priority. It's central to the folks in the frontline communities and to the work of our office. I think we're all in this. We understand what those concepts mean to communities, to these vulnerable communities. So we'll be talking about that slide together. More equitable engagement and communication is an important community priority. They want to see more of that centered and tailored to their specific needs and wants. They want to see more government accountability in more process-oriented work. And then the topical priorities are community wealth. That's things like living wages and jobs and economic development, education, training, green jobs. And housing and buildings is affordable housing resources and home ownership related to community wealth. Then neighborhoods, that's beautification, safety, green spaces, accessibility, and walkability. Those are elements that are really important to the community, Richmond community. And then, of course, health and well-being. That's things like safety and health. So with our equity tool, what we're trying to do is make sure that these priorities are front and center considerations in every strategy that we develop. So centered on the community priorities that were heard during the listening process, that those 7 that I just went over, that's where they came from. In terms of the product, so the full tool, full equity screening tool, is a list of questions and considerations to go through as you're thinking about equitable climate action planning for the city. And then there's a quick decision guide, which is a more realistic version that we'll use as a group, and it's shorter and more condensed and hits the higher priority areas. So we don't have to go through, say, 100 questions for every single strategy. So in the document that was attached to the email yesterday is a list of both the draft condensed tool and the full equity screening tool. And what we'll be working on today is going through all the questions the draft questions in the full screening tool, because we want to make sure that they really do hit on the points that need to be considered. But before we jump into that, I want to go ahead and take a break. So as you know, we've extended this meeting to 2 hours, and I want to be considerate of everyone's time and our need to kind of go take care of a couple things. So why don't we break for 10 minutes? We'll be back at 11:55, and then we'll start back up into some real work. Any questions for me at this time?
Talk to you in 10 minutes.
Okay, we'll see you then.
Thanks. Okay.
Hope that gave everyone a few minutes to take care of things and get ready to get into the core of what we want to accomplish today, which is the draft equity screening tool. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again.
And did you want me to read the note from Andrew before we?
Yes, please do.
Okay, sure. So Andrew put a note to the point about grid capacity for renewables. Neither California's nor Hawaii's grids were built to be primarily solar powered, and yet they currently are 100% solar at times. This reality and multiple studies demonstrate how our existing grid can easily accommodate vastly more renewables, and more energy storage and efficiency that will smooth out the whole system are coming online all the time. So Michael is right, more.
Excellent. All right. Thank you for that. Okay, so the draft equity screening tool, went over this right before the break, and there are 7 key questions. So we want to be considering, does the proposed action promote racial equity and environmental justice? Does it reflect equitable engagement and communication? Does it demonstrate and promote government accountability? Does it promote community wealth? Does it expand affordable housing? Does it support safe and beautiful neighborhoods? And does it promote health and well-being? So, do we have a roundtable member with us today who would like to speak to the work that went into this tool? All right, I'm going to jump into the next slide. So what we're going to do as a group, and I apologize, I heard a little bit of background noise, but I wasn't sure if someone was trying to speak up. Okay, I'm going to keep going ahead, but please speak up if you do have something to interject. So on the, if you want to open the Google Doc, you'll see all of these 7 points broken up into individual slides. The first one looks like this. This is the, does the proposed action promote racial equity and environmental justice? So this activity we're going to be going through together is thinking about what questions can we use to determine the extent to which each proposed climate action and resilience strategy in the plan prioritizes equity as it relates to these topics. So one example is a strategy from Richmond 300. And that strategy says continue funding programs to plant trees and educate the public on the importance of trees. So that sounds great, but if we want to really make sure that that strategy is equitable when it comes to racial equity and environmental justice, then there are some questions we want to dig a little deeper into and ask. And so what communities would benefit most from the proposed action? Okay, well, let's think about it then. If we're trying to plant trees and educate the public, how could we make that strategy a little more specific to addressing racial equity and environmental justice and in those neighborhoods? And then, does it generate burdens? We'll think about that a little more specifically, either directly or indirectly to historically disenfranchised communities. Are there burdens that may include costs or accessibility issues, displacement, and others? So that's just an example of one strategy. For this group, Buildings and Energy, it would be interesting, and you guys were talking about that a little more in the breakouts and then in the bigger group. I appreciate all that feedback. Those are good examples to be considering as we go through this process. So with that, why don't we go ahead? I'm going to open the Google Doc on my screen for those of you who can't potentially see it on yours. This is what the first one looks like. Let me see if I can. Yeah, once again, I'm not seeing you all, so I apologize for that.
We can see the screen.
As long as you can see me, that's what matters. All right, so this is the first one. And I think what would be really helpful, some of you have already started going into this. Take a few minutes to read it to yourself, reflect on this tool. So if you're considering any kind of strategy, either the one about the trees or solar, something specific to an area of your expertise when it comes to climate action and resilient strategies, think about these questions and which ones do you like? Which ones are you not sure about? Are there any that you just can't live with? It's not helpful or it needs to be spelled out more. And this is a live document that everyone can access at the same time and drag stars and question marks and X's around. And then at the bottom, where it says add feedback, feel free to actually type in any feedback that you have. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes just to kind of read through this and get used to it. And then we can start talking about it together.
And Dawn, maybe if it's helpful for the group, just to reiterate the context in which to think about this tool. So this equity screening tool, as you mentioned, was created by the roundtable, and we're now sharing it with all of the working groups for you all to provide feedback. And ultimately, this is going to come back to this working group and all of the other working groups. And you all are going to actually use this screening tool as you develop the actions and strategies during the planning process in the next few meetings that we're going to have later this winter. So if you can, it may be helpful to be thinking about that. Like, these questions are intended to help us ensure that the actions and strategies that we're developing in this planning process are centered in equity in each of the areas that were identified as community priorities. And so that's the goal or the purpose of this tool. And so what we're trying to do is elicit specific questions in each of those areas that will help us as we're developing actions and strategies. So if you can, that may be helpful to keep in mind as well.
Are there any questions about this or what she just said?
So this is a workshop tool that's developed for us to use as a filter that will further be used, to filter all of our ideas through. This is not for public consumption. This is a filter for us, is what you just said.
It is being created for you all to use and us, everyone to use during this planning process. And then ultimately, we hope that it will continue to be used in sort of a more detailed version in implementation of these actions and strategies, and ultimately further throughout the city. But we are starting with using it now through the planning process to develop these actions and strategies. Does that answer your question?
Halfway. No, yeah, I think I get it. I was just very curious. We went a long way around that answer for a guy like me. No, but thank you, Alicia.
Can I help clarify that or add any more?
I'll say something. I think this came up a few times in one of the earlier working groups that I listened in on. And one thing that helped me was to think of it as a tool that other agencies or city departments might use when they're actually creating policies or programs that would implement these strategies. So I think that Adam may have had some thoughts. We talked yesterday briefly about this. Adam or Irina, did you have any thoughts you wanted to share? Or David?
I'm more than happy to. I guess my thought of how this a tool like this could eventually be useful is, I guess maybe in a couple different ways. It could be a really useful tool for a project champion, someone who's maybe proposing a strategy or proposing something that we may want to implement to quality check things and make sure that all of these boxes are checked, to really make sure that the project is addressing all of these specific things. It could also be used as an evaluation tool. Maybe there's several proposed projects or strategies or routes that we may want to take, and using something like this could be a great tool for measuring some of those alternate strategies to see which one ultimately we would want to move forward with. But yeah, I certainly think that, and I guess my understanding of what we would like from this group is really getting a good sense of what may need to be tweaked or modified with some of these questions, so that from a technical perspective, what is it that's going to be useful to ask and evaluate and ultimately inform some of this decision-making process.
Excellent. Thank you. That really helped. Anyone else have thoughts?
Dawn, can I ask a quick one?
Sure.
I know you mentioned that this is kind of the long format. Does the executive summary version already exist, or will that be developed once this is fine-tuned?
I actually have it up. I'm going to share my screen so that you guys can see what that looks like. So this document that was attached in the email goes over the guiding principles, what the equity screening tool is. This is the quick decision guide. And Brianne, please correct me if I'm misstating something. But this goes through the community priority areas and the key questions and considerations. So this is what the quick tool looks like right now. And then the longer one these are the questions that we're reviewing in our Google document.
Yeah, so y'all are going to be looking at the content for the full tool that Dawn's showing right now. The quick decision guide that was at the top will be edited to match the content and the priorities that come out of today's discussion, the feedback from the rest of the working groups, and then another review by the roundtable. So that will be edited.
Did that answer that question? Okay. So with that, I know that we've all been looking at the environmental justice document. I'm going to I'm not going to share that screen right now because technically I think it's making my what you're seeing jump around too much. So as long as you can all open it up on your own browsers, then we're looking at the same thing. I see lots of stars on the first one where what communities would benefit most from the proposed action. I see a question mark. So someone is saying that they're not sure about this. Whoever wrote that, do you want to ask the question or add any comments to what might help that be a better question?
Sure, Dawn. So that was actually me, and I was actually just working on a feedback note down in the bottom. I like the intent of the question. I guess what I would hope to see out of this question, and actually a lot of other ones, is specific quantitative metrics that might be able to be included as part of this analysis. Just again, back to my earlier point about being able to compare alternate strategies or projects. I think when the question like this is this open-ended or this vague, it may be difficult to really get a good, helpful response. And so that's why I put a question mark. I like the intent, but I think it could delve in a little bit deeper.
Yeah, that's a good point. In the environment working group the other day, someone said a lot of these are great questions, but yes or no, or listing the communities doesn't really get at what we're trying to learn from the question. So, what communities would benefit most from the proposed action and how, I think is what you're saying, or some other, indicator that would lead to a more valuable response. And then further down, I see a couple more question marks. So if you want to ask those questions here in the big group, that's great. If not, and you just want to leave your feedback at the bottom, that's fine too. And this is in our Google Drive. So you'll have access to this, for the next several days. We'll just ask you to take a look between now and Monday so that we can incorporate all of your feedback.
Dawn, I had a question on the third bullet. I just don't think I understand the question. So it was more of I'm not questioning what it means so much as trying to understand the words.
Okay, Brianne, can you help with that one? The third bullet, can the benefits of the proposed action be targeted in progressive, creative, proactive ways to reduce historical or current disparities? And how can that reduction be measured?
Yeah,
What is that trying to get at?
so just as a reminder, this content is coming from work that we've done with the roundtable and then sort of refined internally. So actually these question marks are helpful. One of the things we were hoping to get from you all, which we are, is which of these questions need more explanation so that this tool is actually usable by you all and the rest of our stakeholders. So keep putting those. To that question in particular, the third bullet, I believe, if I remember correctly, that this came out of a discussion that the roundtable was having at one of their previous meetings around looking at how current programs or maybe future programs impact or could impact disparities in terms of maybe service or access, and if those disparities are historical, caused or linked to historical programs and things. So the best way I can think about this is with the example that Dawn gave around tree planting programs. So we have an action that is in our Richmond 300 master plan to, I can't remember the exact words, continue funding tree planting and education programs. So if we think about that in relation to this question, if we are continuing to fund existing tree planting programs, is that missing out on what communities might historically not be benefiting from those programs? Is that something we can look at? Can we look at how historical and current disparities related to tree planting, such as urban heat island impacts, can be reduced through tree planting programs being targeted towards certain areas? So this is kind of a complex one, but that's probably as much more as I can give as far as information. If you have other thoughts, please do add them or voice them, because your feedback is really helpful.
I think that's a great explanation and a really important thing for us to be doing. I wonder if there's just ways to word this so it's some of the, like, I had a hard time just figuring out what to target something in a progressive way to reduce a disparity. I didn't know what that meant, and I'm still not 100% sure what it means. So I'm wondering if there's a more concrete way of saying it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great
Yeah,
point.
that was another good point that came up the other day. We need a really good copy editor who will just kind of simplify this so it is easy to understand.
Yeah, and this is Carrie. I added a few questions in the feedback below as well, in terms of, and maybe it's defined elsewhere. For example, historically disadvantaged communities. I know in the Virginia Clean Economy Act this year, it does go and define those in terms of listing out Indigenous communities, veterans, low-income groups, communities of color, etc. So in the tool, you want to have reference to who those communities are. And then in the fourth bullet, I just ask, does acknowledging / respecting or honoring, that is excellent. And is the intent to keep it at an acknowledgement, or do you want to go further and adding something to the effect of like correcting historic wrongs, or, is the intent to rectify, or is it simply to acknowledge? And acknowledging is important. I don't want to diminish that.
No, this is fantastic feedback. Really appreciate those points. So please, everyone,
I'm sorry.
think along those lines. Wendy?
And Jeff put a comment too, just saying thanks for pointing out the condensed or summarized tool, and that he thinks having a one-page version will be critical both for executive level buy-in and for the city to use more broadly.
Absolutely. Yeah, turning this into something that's really useful, that that we as everyone on this call, you're all making decisions for some organization, and we want this to be a tool that everyone can use, whether it is for city planning or it's incorporating these strategies. You're all representing Richmond in some way. So that's why we're doing this work together. We're learning how to think about these things, prioritize these things, and create a common goal. So great points. So with that, why don't we jump to the housing and buildings slide? That's number 10 in the Google document. And we want to be thinking about, does the proposed action expand affordable housing? So take a few minutes to read through those questions, and we'll do the same thing. And we'll kind of take this opportunity to do the exercise together as a group. And then the next, after we finish this slide, we're going to split up into breakout rooms, and you'll have time in a smaller group to think a little more intimately about one of these priorities. So like I said, go ahead and read through it, and then we'll continue the conversation. Okay, so as you continue to read through it on your own and add your feedback, I see some question marks. So for that first one, I see a couple of question marks. Could this reduce the number of families that are cost burdened by housing and transportation? How could that question be made better? Any thoughts?
I dropped those question marks on every could. I have concern about, and this is a very minor thing, but could gets us really into the weeds. If this is trying to refine to make it so that it doesn't, that's fantastic. But I like it when we use the does words instead of getting into a gray area of what the potential is. The first thing I see when I see could is, of course, it could. My question is, when we ask these could questions, are we using that to have a conversation where it directs it away from those, externalities that we're trying to avoid?
Yeah, great point. Thank you. Any other comments or questions or clarifications?
I noticed on some of them it asks, how do you know? And I kind of wonder if that is something that we're just consistently supposed to ask ourselves for all of these. Because these are really big questions and important questions. I'm not sure. Could this reduce barriers to home ownership? I don't know. Like, again, that has to do, I think, with these interconnectivity, and there could be codes or policies or competing interests that are unclear. So I'm wondering how much of that should be part of something like this, or who is supposed to be answering these questions? You have to be an expert to answer.
Great point. Anyone have any thoughts on that? Suggestions?
If I could just jump in, Rob, to one of your questions, among the many people who will be answering these questions is you all of us collectively in our working groups as we're thinking about draft strategies for the climate action and resilience plan. We know that we will not be able to answer all of these questions because we are not experts in all of these areas. Part of this exercise of creating the equity screening tool and then using it is a little bit of an experiment and a way to start ingraining equity thinking into how we are developing those climate action and resilience strategies. So for example, for that first one on reducing the number of families that are cost burdened by housing, this will not be applicable to many of the strategies that we come up with in general. But we want to make sure that it's at least in the back of our minds as we're thinking about, for this group, thinking about energy efficiency. That's certainly relevant to housing cost burden, or renewable energy that could be applicable too. The details of how it will, to the other question about how do you know? I think that is an important one to ask for all of these, but we're not going to have the expertise or the time really to get into the nitty gritty of the detailed data of how we know. We might suggest as part of our strategy drafting process, hey, we think here that this might have an impact. And then what will happen is that we have folks who are experts in fields like housing who are part of our community working group, which will review what comes out of each of our topical working groups. And we'll see those sort of flags literally on some sort of document and say, oh, buildings and energy working group thought that this might have an impact on housing cost burden or something. Let's dig into that a little bit more on this draft strategy. So that's the kind of process that will be happening. It will vary in degree of rigorousness, I guess, depending on time and how many strategies we're talking about and all of that. So it's really just getting us starting to think about these things.
Thanks. That's both helpful and exciting. That's a cool process. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
All right, can you all hear me? Okay, I'm sharing my screen again, so I can't see it. Sorry. But what we're going to do now is go into the breakout rooms. And again, it's a live document that you can all access all of the community priorities, and we would love for you to take a look at them. All of the different groups are going to be looking at this together. So we're just grateful for any feedback we can get, because like I said, it's a process for us to be thinking about these thoughts, and it's also an opportunity for us to provide our inputs to make sure that this is useful and that it considers all of the suggestions that all of you as stakeholders can contribute. So in the breakout groups, there are going to be 5 of them. Irina will be on the engagement and communication slide. So if you're in the group with her, you'll jump to that slide. If you're with Adam, you'll jump to the government accountability slide. If you're with Brianne, jump to the community wealth slide. If you're with David, go to the neighborhood slide. And then Wendy will be facilitating the health and well-being slide. And again, we're going to just continue what we've been doing in this larger group, review the tool content through discussion, and then use the symbols and slide notes to provide your feedback. And the main question for you to consider is, what questions can we ask to ensure that each strategy prioritizes equity as it relates to these priorities? So the priority that you're focusing on, be thinking about that specifically and make sure that those questions really get at that community priority. So I know it's a lot to think about. So just take some time to